A software package with 3 million daily downloads allows attackers to run code on your machine.
Hey Matt, tell us why we can't trust proxy packs anymore.
Glad you asked. So, recent bug was just found that allows arbitrary code execution in Node.js, which is a JavaScript that is used quite frequently for um, things that back in the day you wouldn't actually think of using JavaScript for, I guess is the way I think of it. People run servers on Node.js, client software, all sorts of stuff. It's no longer just for web pages and things like that. So this guy, Tim Perry, found this bug in the Pac-Resolver package, Pac here being PAC or proxy autoconfig. He reported this responsibly with the help of a company called Sneak, and he did a write-up on it. So this code handles proxy config files. So like we said, the Pac or proxy autoconfig file, this code will generate a function that lets your code decide whether to proxy a connection or not. This is actually something that those Pac files do. They're very common in environments where you have web filtering involved, where everything has to pass through a proxy, but you may not want everything to pass through the same proxy, or some things should not be proxied at all. So this Pac file actually is a limited set of JavaScript for the logic of, doing a comparison, saying if the domain matches this, proxy it. If the domain has this other thing, don't proxy it or proxy it differently. So there's a small amount of JavaScript that does that logic. But it's kind of weird, right? Because usually when you've got a configuration file, the last thing you want is to have code actually running within it, which is kind of where this starts to be a problem. So Tim Perry found this issue it's a sort of a conjunction of multiple modules. So Pac-Resolver uses Degenerator, which helps make that JavaScript code run as a sandbox function using something called VM, which is a module that comes with Node.js. And I know I'm getting a little in the weeds here. Basically, you've got a way to run JavaScript, sort of to execute it within this. And VM is not meant as a security sandbox. And as a result, it's not that hard to actually break out of it. There's more than one way to do it. But the example that I read about was you can sort of add extra JavaScript at the end of a Pac file and say this first portion is for the proxy, but define a function that I think overrides another function that already exists in JavaScript, and that'll run every time that other function is supposed to be called. That's just one way of doing it. But basically, you end up with a file, this Pac file, that is controlled by somebody else. On a hostile network, this is sort of something that might be an attacker might figure out how to push to the machine that executes JavaScript code, whatever you want to run. So that's the big problem, just by specifying a little extra code inside that proxy Pac file. So there is a fix for this. Actually, it was a fix between two different modules. Pac-Resolver required a new version of Degenerator, and Degenerator put in some extra sandboxing features. So the short version of all this is if you run Pac-Resolver, and that might be hard to figure out unless you're doing like a software bill of materials on your own software. But if you're running it, take a look. Definitely time to update it and the packages that are related to it. Specifically, if you're using Pac files in your environment and you're writing Node.js code and you're not sure whether you're using Pac-Resolver somewhere, probably a time to take a look at your code. But yeah, go patch. It's the same as every week. Here's the bug. Go patch.
Yeah, it's a little annoying because Pac files are very convenient. They're very versatile, and they allow developers and enterprises to, like you said, you can this segment of your machines go to this proxy, and this segment go to this proxy, and for these particular domains, don't proxy it at all. So that logic it helps people. It's really nice, and so to have this, this bug kind of sucks. I mean, it is just within the Node.js environment, so it's not all proxy Pac files or anything. But I guess this is just a side effect of JavaScript everything, right? Because essentially that's what Node.js is. It's the JavaScript is the server, it's the client, it's what's being controlled, what's controlling pages and everything. So I don't know. It's annoying, but that's what security is sometimes. It's annoying, and you've got to go through and update everything. And it's important to understand what your stack looks like. It's important to understand exactly what you're using in your web development projects. And so when something like this comes up, you have the at least the knowledge to know, hey, I'm using this particular version, which I now know is vulnerable. So I'm going to go update it. So I think just the inventory aspect of things is also important. But that's more just like best practice.
Well, I think one part we can sort of explore for a bit is that pack files are, I mean, they're supposed to be trusted. I mean, your laptop is using them as a map for, I'm using my, say, laptop, but any machine that goes on the network and uses a pack file, either, pulling it down specifically or using WPAD to sort of glean it from the network, trusts what it has to say. You could theoretically man in the middle of that connection and push a malicious pack file, compromise the server and update it with a malicious pack file. But maybe
you could WPAD poisoning
exactly
to get your file on there.
Yeah. So one other option instead of doing a full check of all the software you've written is figure out how to harden that provisioning of the pack file to each machine that's supposed to get it. I imagine HTTPS would be a great way of pushing that. I don't know if there's any side effects of using HTTPS in that situation. Yeah, it could get interesting, but I figure that's another way you could possibly go. And one more that's the long term is maybe don't use JavaScript or don't interpret JavaScript in order to configure something. Like there's got to be another way to do pack files that doesn't require you to treat even the smallest bit of stuff as code. Right. And I realize that when I talk about using it as it's JavaScript and it runs as code, in a lot of situations, it's supposed to be a very minimal version, very minimal interpretation. Like you could run this in something that just understands how to do like 3 or 4 function calls and then ignores everything else. But it seems like there's a temptation because it is technically valid JavaScript to just run it that way.
I mean, if my memory serves me, and I'm reading here, I see WPAD. This whole issue with the pack files and WPAD, there have been tons of vulnerabilities, right? Tons of ways to exploit this process, right? Like swapping out what's in there or changing or redirecting people using a malicious one.
Yeah, absolutely. That's another thing. Like your laptop, I keep saying laptop, but your machine shows up on the network, has to sort of get itself on the network and figure out the lay of the land. So it just trusts whatever it gets.
Whatever's in there.
Yeah, okay. It doesn't know the network. So if people can push that configuration file to the machine, they have some limited control over what's going on. In this case, they have much more control because you can just throw your own JavaScript in there.
Yeah, you can inject code right into something that's not designed to be that way. So yeah, we need more people to do code inspection and sanitization, right?
Yeah, well, thank goodness this guy decided to audit the code. I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of developers. I mean, if given there's like, how many downloads did I say? Was it 3 million downloads per day for this one package?
Wow.
One guy who decided to audit it and found the bug. So good job, But like that's one of those things that everyone says in open source, all bugs are shallow. But that's if people are actually looking for them. And if people are looking for them, then they're just bugs.
They're just bugs.
Invisible.
Yeah. And they exist and nobody knows if tree falls in the woods, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting discussion. We actually had we actually had a discussion on ThreatTraq, I don't know, maybe a couple months ago. It wasn't open source software, but we're talking about supply chain attacks and how, who's ultimately responsible for reviewing this code. I mean, is it the developer, the publishing house who is creating this code? Shouldn't they go through all the checks and just make sure that they don't have these bugs resident or it's been poisoned or what have you? And then it's like, well, you as the end user should also be auditing those things and making sure that you're not getting code that's been poisoned. But that's a whole separate ballgame. I mean, now you're talking about setting up teams that their sole job is just going through software that you're purchasing. And for large organizations like AT&T and others, I mean, my goodness, that's just a lot of people looking through code all the time.
Well, sure, but that's even. I mean, I know we have our experience of AT&T and how many people that would represent. But think about it from a budgetary perspective of a small development house that is paying its 2-3 developers, and then you want to ask them to pay another salary on top of
Right.
that just to do the audit, or like even forget another person, dedicate a significant amount of developer time to auditing an open source package.
Mm-hmm. It's just not
That's
practical.
not going to happen.
Right.
And I think like with the way things are going with security researchers out there and how much money people are making on bug bounties, I feel like a lot of companies are being a little lackadaisical on doing, like, I'm checking over code for security vulnerabilities, and they're just like, you know what? Somebody's going to find this. Somebody will do proper disclosure, even though that's not the case all the time, like Zerodium, right? But maybe they're sitting back on that. And, we see big companies do it. And I'm not going to name names, but we see big companies offering hundreds of thousands of dollars in rewards for certain bugs, right? And to $1 million. So maybe that's also another. It's not a problem. It's good that people are out there doing it, but maybe in the back of their mind, they're like, do we pay a developer to just do security analysis on this code, or maybe we'll just give $5,000 at a time to find, somebody will find it. I don't know. Could be that a little bit.